Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Martial Universe Season 7 based on novel. So let's start. The commotion caused by the Pill River head immersion finally died down following the emergence of Lin Dong. Countless disciples around the Pill River also left with varying emotions. All of them clearly understood that it was likely that all the disciples within the Tao sect would know about this mysterious new disciple in Desolate Hall called Lin Dong. Enduring for 11 days under the Pill River. This frightening result was sufficient to surpass every younger generation member in Tao sect. After the crowd scattered and everyone began to leave, another piece of information caused many people to be stunned as well. Lin Dong had issued a challenge to one of the 4 senior direct disciples of the Desolate Hall, Jiang Hao. Quite a number of people involuntarily parted their mouths when they heard the news. Although they understood that Lin Dong had no other choice, they still involuntarily sighed within their hearts. This new disciple called Lin Dong was really unwilling to be left alone. Such rare deeds had been done by him one after another. The Tao sect was not lacking in talent. However, there was seldom anyone who issued a challenge to the Hall's senior direct disciple after having just joined for less than a month. This was because everyone knew the enormous gap that existed between them. All the disciples clearly understood Jiang Hao's strength. 7 Yuan Nirvana stage is quite an outstanding existence in all 4 halls. Yet, Lin Dong was only at 5 Yuan Nirvana stage, despite having successfully endured the Nirvana tribulation earlier. Although everyone was clearly aware of the gap between the two, they did not say mock Lin Dong and call him an arrogant fool. The result that Lin Dong had displayed earlier was sufficient to get all the disciples within Tao sect to withdraw their underestimation. No one was certain if this new person, who had performed a miracle, would be able to continue performing such miracles. There will be a good show 5 days later. The various disciples thought in this manner after facing each other. An anticipation surged within their hearts. They wanted to see if Lin Dong would once again display such a shocking performance when faced with an old senior direct disciple like Jiang Hao. Additionally, everyone clearly understood that if Lin Dong really ended up fighting on par with Jiang Hao, he would become the fastest person in the history of Tao sect to become a senior direct disciple. Everyone felt envious within their hearts when they thought of this. At the same time, they also started to look forward to the match 5 days later. The next day. Creak. Lin Dong pushed open the door and exited. Sunlight scattered down from the sky and shone onto his body, filling him with a warm and comfortable sensation. Both his eyes narrowed slightly before he opened them. The corner of his mouth involuntarily lifted into an arc when he saw this paradise-like place being shrouded by fog. It was really a decent place. Since Lin Dong was a direct disciple, the place where he stayed at was much quieter than Mo Ling and the rest. Moreover, according to the rules of the Desolate Hall, everyone who was not a direct disciple would have to gather on the Pill River platform and undergo compulsory training. Hence, this mountaintop was quite quiet. Have you rested well? A familiar laughter was suddenly transmitted over while Lin Dong was enjoying this quiet moment. Lin Dong turned his head, only to see Wu Dao standing a short distance away while smilingly staring at him. Lin Dong smiled. After which, he cupped his hands together and bowed at Wu Dao. You little fellow. This time around, the surprise you have given me is quite great. 11 days. This result. It is even better than Senior Ju Tong back then. Wu Dao slowly walked towards him. His eyes paused on Lin Dong's youthful face before he softly sighed. There was a complicated emotion in his tone. Ju Tong. Lin Dong blinked his eyes slightly. Currently, he was also aware that this senior Jutong was the one who had successfully comprehended the great desolated scripture. Moreover, he was an extremely fearsome person, who even charged up to Yuan Gate alone and killed 3 of their great elders. However, you should not be celebrating yet. I am aware that you are hiding many secrets. This time around, it is likely that you used some tactics at the bottom of the Pill River. However, Senior Jutong back then solely relied on his own strength. Wu Dao said. At times, having many tactics is also an ability. Lin Dong shrugged his shoulders. He was always a practical person. As long as it is useful, who cares what it is? After all, there is no absolute fairness in this world. Moreover, these tactics would not appear without reason. In order to obtain them, Lin Dong had to expend great effort and pay a great price for them. Of course, even though Lin Dong put it this way, he still involuntarily had a heartfelt respect for that senior Jutong. The latter was indeed worthy of being a character who dared to charge up to Yuan Gate alone. Little fellow, you are really cunning. Wu Dao laughed. He did not refute Lin Dong's words. After musing for a moment, he said, your act of challenging Jiang Hao this time around is a little reckless. Jiang Hao's strength is not something that Tong Chuan can compare with. I want to study the great desolated scripture. It is unavoidable to face objections from the 4 seniors. Lin Dong helplessly laughed. With your talent, as long as you train for another half a year within the desolate hall, there would definitely be no one who will oppose your promotion to senior direct disciple. Wu Dao uttered those words before immediately shaking his head and said, it is pointless to say anything now. You are also not a reckless person. Since you dare to utter those words, it is likely that you must be confident in your chances. Let's go. I will take you to the Desolate Hall Martial Arts Hall. Since you are a disciple of the Desolate Hall, you will ultimately need to familiarize yourself with the Desolate Hall's martial arts. Wu Dao did not delay any further after uttering those words. His body moved and he stepped into the distance. Lin Dong hurriedly followed when he saw this. The Desolate Hall was extremely spacious. Over a dozen large peaks directly touched the clouds. The fog lingered over the place, giving it the appearance of a paradise. There was some vague training sound being emitted from those mountaintops. A flourishing aura spread over the entire sky. Under Wu Dao's lead, the 2 of them flew for around 10+ minutes, before they finally landed on a large mountaintop near the middle of the desolate hall. One could see a huge ancient stone tower on the top of this mountain. Green rocks covered the surroundings of the stone tower. A stone path that was formed by stone fragments extended out and led over the whole mountaintop. There were quite a number of desolate hall disciples coming and going at this place. When these disciples saw Wu Dao, all of them hurriedly bowed and greeted him. Immediately, numerous strange eyes looked towards Lin Dong. Currently, the latter was also quite a famous person within the desolate hall. Wu Dao nodded slightly towards those disciples. After which, his eyes did not look around as he led Lin Dong and directly headed for that ancient stone tower. When they got nearer, Lin Dong was finally able to sense just how enormous the stone tower in front of his eyes was. Although time had left behind some mottled traces, it also gave the tower an increasingly dense vicissitude aura. This vicissitude aura represented the foundation and inheritance of a sect. Lin Dong looked at the stone tower in front of him before a fiery heat flashed across his eyes. He was clearly extremely curious about this super sect's martial arts. Lin Dong's eyes shifted down from the stone tower. After which, he looked towards the stone door before his eyes immediately narrowed. There was a grey-robed old man at the stone door carrying a broom in his hand and gently sweeping the leaves on the ground. The elderly man's face was extremely old and his wrinkles were just like gullies. Both his eyes also revealed a gray-white color, and it seemed like he did not have any pupils. At a glance, he was actually a blind person. However, it is this blind person that caused the mental energy within Lin Dong's Niwen palace to faintly tremble. This situation was something that Lin Dong had encountered for the first time in many years. The thing that most surprised Lin Dong the most was that he was unable to sense even the slightest yuan power ripple from this blind old man. Wu Dao had clearly noticed Lin Dong's eyes. However, he did not say anything. He walked forward and bowed his body slightly towards that blind old man. However, the latter did not respond. In fact, he continued to sweep the withered leaves. I will bring you to this spot. The number of martial arts within the martial arts hall is just like an ocean. What you choose will depend on your own luck. I am also unable to provide you with much guidance. Wu Dao was not surprised by that blind old man's reaction. He subsequently turned his head and spoke to Lin Dong. But no matter which martial arts you learn, you must remember not to abandon the essence of our desolate hall. Wu Dao placed his hands behind him and said. Lin Dong was slightly startled. He mused for a moment before softly asking, "Desolate force?" Lin Dong had sensed this unique force when he was fighting with Tong Chuan. If it was not because he possessed the devouring ancestral symbol, he would definitely be at a great disadvantage due to that energy. Wu Dao was clearly extremely satisfied by Lin Dong's reaction. He nodded slightly and said, "There is a desolate stone within the martial arts hall. All the desolate hall's disciples obtain desolate force from there. That energy would strengthen the power of your martial arts." Understood. Lin Dong nodded. He was also extremely interested in that so-called desolate force. Go in. Wu Dao waved his hand. Lin Dong ceased hesitating upon hearing this. He bowed slightly towards Wu Dao and strode forward. He hesitated for a moment when he passed by the blind old man along the way. After which, he also bowed towards the latter before entering the stone tower. Wu Dao looked at Lin Dong's gradually disappearing figure and softly exhaled. His eyes looked towards that blind old man before he softly said, "He is that little fellow who was even more outstanding than Senior Ju Tong in the Pill River head immersion." Kai. The blind old man, who did not once cease sweeping the ground, finally paused at this moment. Back then, Senior Ju Tong merely sat for 3 days in front of the desolate stone to obtain the desolate force. I wonder what Lin Dong can do. He is perhaps the disciple with the greatest odds of comprehending the great desolated scripture in 100 years. If Senior is interested, you can pay more attention to him. Wu Dao looked at the blind old man and softly said. The old man was quiet for a moment and he did not speak. All he did was slowly keep his broom, before he slowly walked into the stone tower. Wu Dao quietly sighed in relief when he saw this. From his demeanor, it seems like he was quite interested in Lin Dong. Little fellow, obtaining the desolate force, is the first step in comprehending the great desolated scripture. If you are unable to even take this step, it is likely that you are not affiliated with the great desolate scripture. Wu Dao raised his head, looked into the tower and softly muttered. Lin Dong slowly walked into the stone tower gently. After experiencing a momentary darkness, his vision brightened up abruptly. An endlessly vast stone hall appeared in Lin Dong's line of sight. The hall was pervaded with a vicissitude aura. Gentle lights were flickering like hovering spirits in the surroundings. The stone hall was extremely unique, and it did not contain any bookshelves. Instead, it was filled with stone tablets that were of different sizes. Each stone tablet was encircled by a faint glow. Lin Dong stood at the main door and looked at the seemingly endless number of martial arts stone tablets. Soon after, he could not help but suck in a breath of air. This is the strength of a super sect. The number of martial arts here was truly terrifying. In the stone hall, one could see a few figures, who were standing firmly while staring at the stone tablets ahead of them with an extremely focused expression. There were also some people, who were seated cross-legged on the floor with their eyes fixated on the stone tablets. These people seemed to be engrossed in the world of martial arts. Lin Dong strode forward lightly. He slowed down his pace and silently walked through the hall that was filled with martial art stone tablets. At the same time, his gaze was constantly sweeping through those stone tablets. Those tablets depicted a dazzling lineup of martial arts. High-grade manifestation martial art, raging bull power skill. High-grade manifestation martial art, swimming dragon step. Low-grade manifestation martial art, water dragon blade technique. Lin Dong began to get dizzy after sweeping through the stone tablets. The multitude of martial arts blurred his vision. Clearly, the number of martial arts that this hall contained had reached a terrifying number. If any one of these martial arts was to be placed in the Great Yang Empire, it would surely cause a carnage. However, in this place, these martial arts were placed everywhere for the disciples to study. How long will it take to find the one? As Lin Dong's eyes swept across the multitude of stone tablets, he shook his head helplessly. If he was to check these stone tablets one by one, he would not finish the process even if he took days and nights. Let's check out the desolate stone first. Lin Dong raised his head and looked into the depths of the hall. Soon after, he quickened his pace and walked past the stone tablets one by one. After approximately 10 minutes, he suddenly stopped. He was slightly astonished as he looked at the direction ahead of him. A few 100 feet ahead, there was an enormous platform. A gigantic grey stone, which was roughly a few 100 feet tall, silently stood tall and upright in the middle of the platform. The huge stone was sphere-shaped and its entire body was dark grey in color. It seemed to be covered with moss as well. Indistinctly, one could see a few fine cracks on its body. An indescribable energy wave was constantly emitting from the huge stone. While Lin Dong was standing at a distance away from it, the energy wave came and collided with him. At that moment, his body shivered and even his mind was slightly dazzled by it. Lin Dong felt as if he was being placed in an ancient desolate land, where heaven and earth was filled with a bleak emptiness. A feeling of desolation pervaded his mind. Even the yuan power in his body felt the corrosive effect of the desolation, channeling through his body slower and slower. Huff! Lin Dong heaved a breath of air. A solemn look swept across his eyes. That energy wave must be the desolate force that Wu Dao was talking about. However, the desolate force that was emitted from this huge stone was countless times stronger than Tong Chuan's. So this is the desolate stone. Lin Dong muttered to himself. Then, he shifted his gaze to the platform surroundings. Around the desolate stone, there were numerous disciples meditating silently. Traces of desolate force released by the desolate stone were being absorbed by these disciples. Lin Dong heaved a sigh and stepped forward. Some of the disciples around the desolate stone heard his footsteps and turned over. A surprised look flashed across their eyes. Apparently, they recognized Lin Dong. However, Lin Dong ignored their stares and continued walking up the platform. Then, he stopped before a grey-colored stone tablet. On the stone tablet, there were some ancient characters. Desolate force. The two ancient words appeared before Lin Dong's eyes, making the corners of his eyes twitched. Then, he shifted his gaze downward and continued reading the rest of the words on the stone tablet. As Lin Dong's gaze shifted downward, an astonished look gradually formed on his face. That was because he discovered that the so-called desolate force was not a kind of pure energy. In fact, it was a kind of technique. This had completely deviated from his expectations. The description on the stone tablet recorded the technique to practicing the desolate force. And at the end of the description, Lin Dong saw the real name of this skill, the desolation skill. The so-called desolate force should be a type of energy that one obtains after practicing this skill. A thought came into Lin Dong's mind. He could feel the potency of the desolation skill. Furthermore, the desolate force that one could obtain by practicing this skill was rather powerful as well. In his previous fight with Tong Chuan, if not for the fact that he possessed the devouring ancestral symbol, he would definitely be put in a sorry state by the corrosive power-filled desolate force. The stone tablet recorded down the detailed technique to practicing the desolation skill. According to the description, the desolation skill was divided into 10 levels. It was a skill that must be practiced by the direct disciples of the Desolate Hall. The technique to practicing this skill was rather unique. One had to start off by absorbing the desolate force from the desolate stone first. From there, he or she had to form the desolate force in his or her body and use yuan power to nurture this seedling. As the seedling grew, the desolate force that he or she possessed would become increasingly stronger. In other words, if one wished to practice this skill, he or she would have to rely on the desolate stone. Otherwise, even if one knew the technique to practicing this skill, he or she would not be able to actually practice it successfully. There's indeed something unique about it. Lin Dong's eyes flickered. Once again, he tried to comprehend all the information written on the stone tablet. Then, he raised his head and looked at the colossal desolate stone ahead of him. Looking at the desolate stone from afar, one could sense the ancientness of it. The numerous marks on the surface of the stone were caused by the aging process. Clearly, this artifact must have existed for a long time. A few 100 feet away from the desolate stone, there were several stone platforms that only had enough space for one person to sit. These stone platforms were filled with Desolate Hall's disciples, who were absorbing traces of desolate force that were emitted by the desolate stone. The desolate force seems to possess an extremely powerful corrosive power, Lin Dong discovered as he got closer to the desolate stone. The desolate force that was spiraling around that area was exceptionally strong, and the surrounding disciples did not dare to get close to it. They were seated a few 100 feet away, and were absorbing the desolate force that was flowing out from the desolate stone. This scene put Lin Dong into a deep thought. He looked at the ground around the desolate stone. From what he had seen, the ground was dried up and cracking, giving the impression of a barren land. "I see," Lin Dong muttered to himself softly. Following which, a faint smile appeared on his face. The technique of practicing the desolation skill began to run through his mind once again. After a slight hesitation, he took a forceful step forward and walked toward the desolate stone. Lin Dong quickly leapt over the disciples. Then, he continued walking ahead without stopping. His action quickly led to an outbreak of commotion in the quiet surroundings. Numerous disciples that were meditating widened their eyes in astonishment and looked at Lin Dong. "Lin Dong, do not get too close to the desolate stone. Otherwise, you will be corroded by the desolate force till your life force is totally depleted." One of the disciples could not help but shout at Lin Dong. "Thanks for the reminder." Lin Dong turned his head and smiled at that disciple. However, he did not stop in his tracks. Even though the desolate force was powerful, his body possessed something that was far more powerful and terrifying. At this moment, the surrounding disciples widened their eyes and pursed their lips tightly while looking at Lin Dong, who was walking towards the desolate stone. The fists in their sleeves were tightly clenched. They clearly knew how deadly was the desolate force around the desolate stone. Thud thud. The sound of Lin Dong's footstep was the only sound that could be heard on the entire platform. Everyone's heartbeats were beating to the pace of Lin Dong's footsteps, getting increasingly faster. As silence swept across the platform, a grey-clothed blind old man walked out from behind a stone tablet that was not far away. He raised his head while his pupilless, ash-colored eyes were fixated on Lin Dong. Following which, a slightly surprised look appeared on his wrinkle-filled, aged face. Subtle sound of footsteps resounded quietly throughout the platform. A skinny figure was walking on the platform. Under numerous shocking gazes, the figure walked with an unhurried pace, getting closer to the gigantic desolate stone in the middle of the platform. This fellow. At this moment, a lot of disciples furrowed their eyebrows. Among these disciples, there were some who tried to get closer to the desolate stone. After all, the closer one got to the desolate stone, the more desolate force one could absorb, and this was highly beneficial to their cultivation of the desolation skill. However, the person who was able to do it had yet to appear. Even the 4 current senior direct disciples could only make it to 50 feet, within the desolate stone at best. If they were to get any closer, their bodies would be corroded by the overbearing desolate force, drying up in the process. How could Lin Dong achieve such a feat, when even the 4 senior direct disciples were unable to do so? However, even though there were a lot of people doubting Lin Dong's reckless move, they did not try to dissuade him from doing so. After Lin Dong's exceptional result in the Pill River, nobody in Desolate Hall dared to treat him as an ordinary disciple. Under the numerous attentive gazes from the onlookers, Lin Dong's figure moved increasingly closer to the desolate stone. Buzz buzz. As Lin Dong moved closer to the stone, he could feel the terrifying energy wave that was coming at him head-on. The desolate force around this area was up to 10 times stronger than where it was a few hundred feet away. The desolate force that pervaded the air pierced through Lin Dong's body from all directions. Under such corrosion, the color of Lin Dong's robe started to fade. Eventually, his robe started to show signs of drying up, appearing like a piece of barren land. The desolate force is rather overbearing. Lin Dong reached out his palms. At this moment, the skin of his palms had become rather dry and dull. A surprised look swept across his face. It seemed like the so-called desolate force was able to innovate anything, including the Yuan power in his body. If he was any other ordinary individual that encountered such overbearing desolate force, it would pose an intractable problem. However, for Lin Dong, it did not seem too much of a bother. Devour. A gentle voice rang across Lin Dong's mind. Following which, traces of devouring power started to extend outward from his body silently. TCCH, TCHH. The devouring power quickly twined around the traces of desolate force that had invaded Lin Dong's body. Without the slightest bit of hesitation, those traces of desolate force were being devoured at once. While the devouring was taking place, a fine sound could be heard from Lin Dong's body. It sounded like someone was crunching a bunch of dried leaves. At this point in time, Lin Dong's shriveled palms were recovering slowly. The desolate force that invaded his body had been completely finished off by the devouring power. As Lin Dong felt what was going on in his body, a smile appeared upon his face. Under the numerous startled looks from the onlookers, Lin Dong cracked his neck gently and quickened his pace. He's actually all right. How can it be? The desolate force has no effect on him. When everyone saw Lin Dong moving as though he was flying, commotions broke out in the surroundings. Everyone was flabbergasted at this scene. They could not believe that Lin Dong was actually able to withstand the boundless and dreadful desolate force. Under the platform, in front of the stone tablet, the blind old man stared silently in the direction of Lin Dong with his pupilless eyes. His face did not show any emotions. However, his wizened hands that were holding the broom tightly clenched unconsciously. Buzz buzz. With his quickened pace, Lin Dong rushed into 10 feet within the desolate stone in less than 10 seconds. The desolate force in this area had reached a rather terrifying level. Even the ground began to dry up and crack at this moment. When Lin Dong's feet stepped onto the ground, the ground sunk and revealed a heap of ash. After Lin Dong entered 10 feet within the desolate stone, he finally felt an immense pressure. If not for the fact that the devouring power was channeling through his body, his life force would have been corroded by the desolate force to the point that he died. Once again, Lin Dong recalled the technique to practicing the desolation skill in his mind and took in a deep breath of air. Then, a series of profound and cryptic chant flowed through his mind. TCCH, TCCH. As the chant flowed through his mind, the unique yet vigorous desolate force rapidly entered Lin Dong's body, as if it was being attracted by something. When the desolate force entered Lin Dong's body, it did not have a single chance to create chaos. Instead, it was manipulated by the domineering devouring power, and forcefully directed towards Lin Dong's dantian. If he was an ordinary individual that was practicing the desolation skill, no matter how strong his physical body was, he would still need some time to adapt before allowing traces of desolate force to be absorbed into his body and form the desolate seedling. Clearly, Lin Dong was able to skip these insignificant steps. The desolate force might be domineering, but the devouring power was far more domineering and powerful. With the suppression from his devouring power, the desolate force was not able to pose any threat. Along with the series of cryptic chant in Lin Dong's mind, the grey-colored desolate force flowed steadily into his body. In Lin Dong's dantian, a stream of grey-colored air began to form. However, it had yet to reach the level of forming a desolate seed. Too slow. Lin Dong furrowed his eyebrows and said something that would cause those disciples to spurt out blood if they were to hear it. The first time they practiced the desolation skill, it took them 1 or 2 days to successfully form a trace of desolate force in their bodies. However, Lin Dong was still not satisfied with the absurd speed that he was going at right now. Of course, Lin Dong did not care about what other people think. All he wanted was to become stronger, so much so that the next time he met Ling Qingzhu, he did not have to hang his head low anymore. As such, he would not give up on any opportunities to become stronger. Therefore, when Lin Dong finished his sentence, he continued walking forward despite receiving numerous horrified gazes from the desolate hall's disciples. Hiss! As Lin Dong continued walking forward, the disciples surrounding the platform took in a deep breath of cold air. Could it be that this fellow wanted to hug the desolate stone and practice the skill? He surely knew that, within 10 feet of the desolate stone, every step he took would increase the strength of the desolate force by up 10 times, right? At this point of time, the broom in the blind old man's hands began to tremble slightly. A glint seemed to flash across his ash-gray eyes. Under numerous attentive gazes, Lin Dong walked forward step by step. He could feel the rising pressure in his surroundings. Soon after, a faint green glow encircled his body. 1 step, 2 steps, 5 steps, 9 steps. Thud. When Lin Dong took the final step forward, everyone's eyes were wide open. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. Under those incredulous gazes, Lin Dong raised his arm slowly and tapped his finger on the desolate stone. As Lin Dong's slender finger fell on the desolate stone, a coarse feeling that was accompanied by a chilliness extended through his finger. Following which, an indescribable yet terrorizing energy wave gushed out from the desolate stone like a volcanic eruption. Eventually, the energy surged into Lin Dong's body mercilessly. Bang! At this moment, Lin Dong's body trembled fiercely. Even his bones gave off cracking sounds. A dark grey color extended through his finger all the way up to his arm with an astonishing speed. Snap! Crack! The dark grey color moved extremely fast. Within seconds, it had extended throughout Lin Dong's body. Even his face started to show signs of shriveling up, appearing like a stone statue that was smashed in the face. When the surrounding disciples saw this scene, their facial expression changed drastically. This fellow finally tasted the consequences of being reckless. Did he really think that anyone could endure the desolate force that was contained in the desolate stone? He can't endure it, huh? In front of the stone tablet, the already wrinkle-filled face of the blind old man shriveled up even more. His hands were holding the broom tightly. After a moment, he finally shook his head and took a step forward, preparing to make a move. Elder, this disciple can still handle it. Just when the blind old man took a step forward, a soft voice that was sent through a trace of mental energy echoed into his ears silently. The blind old man was startled before he gradually retracted his footstep. With his ash-gray eyes, he looked at the distant figure that was touching the desolate stone. A confused look appeared on his wizened face. This video will end here.